An original podcast from podlatino.com.
Some places seem designed to hold secrets, not because they are remote or hard to reach, but because they have a particular quality, the ability to absorb whatever happens inside them without offering any explanation in return. The Isdalen Valley in southwestern Norway is one of those places. Norwegians call it Isdalen, which in their language means the Ice Valley. It is a natural corridor between mountains, with a trail that hikers from Bergen have walked for generations. A place for family outings, Sunday walks. And yet on November the 29th, 1970, that ordinary valley became the setting for one of the most baffling unsolved cases in 20th century European history. What they found that day was not simply the body of a woman, it was a puzzle assembled with a deliberateness that no one more than 50 years later has been able to fully unravel. Two German tourists hiking along the Isdalen Trail decided to leave the main path and explore a more secluded area among the trees. About 200 meters off the trail, in a small depression in the ground surrounded by rocks, they found a body. It was the body of a woman. She was lying face up, arms extended at her sides, palms facing upward. Large portions of her body had been severely burned. Around her were the remnants of a fire, an empty liquor bottle, pills scattered across the ground, personal belongings that no one would have abandoned willingly, an open suitcase partially destroyed by the flames. The first thing investigators noticed was not the condition of the body, but something more subtle. The scene seemed too orderly to be an accident. Something about the arrangement of the objects did not fit the most immediate explanations. The autopsy revealed something that complicated the case from the very beginning. The burns were not the cause of death. The woman had died before the fire reached her. There was no soot in her lungs. Her stomach contained the remnants of at least 70 tablets of phenamol, a medical barbiturate, at a lethal concentration. The fire had been set after her death. Someone had burned her, or she herself had arranged everything in advance. Both were technically possible. Neither was fully satisfying. What followed was a search for an identity, and that is where the real problem began. The woman had no documents on her. In itself, that could have had ordinary explanations, but as investigators examined her belongings, they found something that did not. Every garment she wore had its labels removed, not torn out hastily, removed carefully with scissors, with precision. Her toiletries had their brand markings scraped off. The serial numbers on certain metal objects had been eliminated. Someone had worked to make sure that woman could not be identified, and that work had been meticulous. The Bergen police sent her fingerprints to Interpol. No matches were found. No one claimed the body. No one reported a disappearance that matched her description. But the woman had left 2 suitcases in a storage locker at the Bergen train station before she died. Inside them were clothing, cash in several European currencies, medications, and jewelry, and like everything she carried, not a single identifiable label anywhere. When detectives began tracing her movements in the days before her death, the case took on an entirely different scale. The woman had stayed at least 2 hotels in Bergen under different names, not variations of the same name, but completely separate identities, with passports from different countries. And Bergen was not the only place. The investigation expanded. The same woman, identified by physical description, had traveled through at least 9 European countries in the months before her death. Switzerland, Belgium, France, Germany, the United Kingdom. In each place she had used a different name. In each place she had paid in cash. In no place had she left a permanent address or an emergency contact. The names she had used included, among others, Fenella Lorch, Claudia Thielt, and Genevieve Lancier. None corresponded to any traceable real person. None led to a family, an employer, or a verifiable origin. It was as though someone had constructed an existence specifically designed to leave no coherent trace. Among her belongings, investigators also found a small notebook with coded entries. Cryptographers worked on it and managed to decipher portions of the content. It was not a personal diary. It was a record of movements, dates, cities, numbers that could correspond to hotel room numbers, sums of money, an operational log, the kind of notation someone would keep if they needed to track activities that could not be written down in explicit terms. That discovery was the first to put into words what several investigators had already been thinking, that the woman of Isdalen might have been a spy. The hypothesis was not far-fetched. The year 1970 was deep in the Cold War. Intelligence services from multiple countries operated across Europe with undercover agents who used multiple identities and traveled with altered documentation. Norway, with its strategic position in the North Atlantic and its proximity to the Soviet Union, was an area of significant interest to several agencies. But no intelligence service ever claimed the woman, no agency ever acknowledged her existence. And in the context of the Cold War, that could mean either that the hypothesis was wrong or that it was entirely correct. There is one detail investigators found particularly disturbing. Shortly after the body was discovered, and before it became public knowledge that the suitcases at the station might be connected to the woman of Isdalen, someone tried to retrieve them. It was not the police, someone who had the storage claim tickets, or who had somehow gained access to the lockers, went to collect them. The station attendant, for reasons he himself could not clearly explain, did not hand them over and afterward notified the authorities. Had it not been for that chance circumstance, the only identifiable belongings the woman left behind would have vanished. That attempt tells us that someone knew the suitcases were there, that someone knew her movements well enough to know where she had left her luggage, and that this person had reasons for not wanting the police to find it. Who that person was has never been determined. In 1971, Norwegian authorities closed the case with an official ruling of suicide. The woman was buried in the Mullendal Cemetery under the provisional name Fem Ankonu de Isdalen, the unknown woman of Isdalen. But the case did not go away. In 2016, the Norwegian public broadcaster NRK launched a thorough journalistic investigation, reviewed archives that had been closed for decades, and commissioned new forensic analyses. An isotopic study of the bone remains indicated that the woman had grown up in a region of Central Europe, possibly in what is today Germany or adjacent areas. Mitochondrial DNA was sequenced and compared against international databases. No match was found. In 2017, the remains were exhumed for additional analysis. The results refined the profile. The woman had been born around 1930 and was approximately 40 years old at the time of her death. Dental analysis suggested origin in the Rhine Basin or nearby areas. The DNA, more precise than before, was entered into expanded databases. To this day, no match. What remains, more than 50 years later, is this. A woman died in a Norwegian valley in November of 1970. She was approximately 40 years old. She had traveled across Europe under multiple names. She had carefully erased any trace that might lead back to her real identity. She died with a lethal amount of barbiturates in her system, her body afterwards set on fire. No one claimed her. No one reported her missing. No intelligence service, no organization, no family ever acknowledged her existence. The headstone at Mullendal Cemetery still bears no proper name. It carries a Latin inscription, Quisquis es. Whoever you are. It is the most honest inscription that could have been chosen. Because after more than 5 decades of investigation, forensic analysis, and long-form journalism, the most precise answer that exists about who that woman was is still the same one that existed in 1970. No one knows. The Isdalen Valley holds that secret with the same indifference with which it held the body on that November morning. And until an answer is found, that nameless woman will remain what the world called her simply because it had nothing else to call her, the woman of Isdalen.